Okay, so good evening, everyone who's here live and on Zoom, and welcome to to our new members who are here live and on Zoom also. The truth is, really, we're not ready for the first Shiur on the sugya. I'm not ready for it, and I think everyone else isn't. But I'm unable to be here next week, so I'll just try and give a general introductory Shiur. And I'm conscious that the Marim comments I gave out were quite heavy, but that's because I'm assuming they will take everyone through to the next week and a half. And all I'm going to try and do in today's show is just make some general comments and highlights sort of the things that I want to focus on from the Rishonim. So for those who have been here since we began the Perek, we've already met Reb Nechemia a few times, and confusingly, we've also met Nechemia, Xeris Nechemia, a couple of times. So just to give a general hakdama, what we think of as classically the concept of Muktza, we're used to asking, on Shabbos, is something Muktza or isn't it Muktza? That's not an entirely accurate halachic way to speak. The concept of Muktza is whether something is muchan, whether it's made for use on Shabbos. Is it prepared for use on Shabbos, or is it something which isn't set aside for Shabbos use and therefore shouldn't be used on Shabbos? And were I to use it on Shabbos, even for a permissible use, I would be innovating a new hishtamshus with it. That's the concept of Muktza. But really, it's not entirely accurate to talk about something as either it is Muktza or it's not Muktza. And indeed, this comes out from our sugya itself, in which we see something can be Muktza with respect to one type of use and not Muktza with respect to another type of use. But just to give a broad brush headlines, on the one hand, if you take something like a stone is not a keli. That means by default, it's not made for human use. A keli, a utensil, is the servant of us humans. We've designed it and designated it to be there to serve us, whereas a stone just is. And therefore, a stone isn't made for human use, even though it does have all sorts of possible uses. You can use a stone as a door stopper or a paperweight. And indeed, if you want to keep your front door open during the week, you might pick up a stone and jam it open with that. But to do so on Shabbos would be to be using it for something that it's not before Shabbos made for, and therefore we would say it's muktzah machmas gufa, it's completely muktzah. It can't even be used for a productive use that you want to use it for. In contrast, a keli is our servant, our slave. It's made for our use. And therefore, if the keli is primarily designated for a mutter use, like a spoon, I can use it for anything that I want to do so on Shabbos. If the keli is made for an osa use, for example, it's a pen, nonetheless, it's not completely muktzah in the sense that it's still a keli, it's still my servant. And therefore, perhaps, and this is really what our sugya discusses, even though its primary use is as a pen is for writing, nonetheless, all kelim are made are our slaves. All kelim are designated for human use, and therefore, by default, they're made for any use that I can give it. And therefore, if I wish to use the pen to scratch my back or as a paperweight, that would be mutter, which is what we call LeTsorech gufay, that it's used for a positive use. Now, it's not that the pen is a better paperweight than the stone. It may be as good or as bad as the stone. The point is that the stone is not a keli at all, and therefore wasn't made for any use whatsoever. Whereas the pen was before Shabbos already a keli, and therefore, even though we think of a pen as muktzah, more accurately, what we mean is it's muktzah with respect to movement just for itself. If I just want to move it from one place to another to protect it. If I want to use it or move it for a non-muktzah use, with respect to that, it's not muktzah. That's the general hakdama of the concept of muktzah that we've seen till now. That's one sugya. We then learned a sugya on Kufchaf Gimon Amud Beis, which is known as the Gezerah of Nechemia. Here, when we talk about Nechemia, we're not referring to Rabbi Nechemia of our Mishnah, but we're referring to the biblical Nechemia. And he created a gezerah known as Gezeras Kelim, in which he basically wanted to minimize the use of all kelim. Nothing to do whether they are muchon for Shabbos or not. But since Shabbos is a day when we step back from activity, he created a gezerah against moving kelim unnecessarily or for non-particular uses. So a book or a chair, or or an item of clothing, according to Nechemia, had some restrictions on moving it for reasons other than direct need. And this behaves somewhat analogously to Muktza. It's a quasi-Muktza. It behaves a little bit like a Muktza of sorts, but it's not because of Haktza, it's not because of what the Kedi was omed for, but just, even though this is a perfectly normal Kedi, it's a book or a chair, nonetheless it was included in the Gezerah of Nechemia, and gradually that was unraveled until either the Gezerah of Nechemia disappeared and all we're left with is Muktza, or there are some minimal trace remains of Gezerah's Nechemia. For example, what might be a trace remain of Gezerah's Nechemia? The Mishnah Berurah is of the view that even a non-Muktza Kedi, you shouldn't move for no reason whatsoever. You shouldn't move just for a trivial reason. A non-Muktza Kedi, you can move like a book. You can move because you want to read it for it, or you can move it because you want to protect it, Mechamal itself, but you shouldn't move it for no reason whatsoever. And that may be a lingering remnant of the Gezerah of Nechemia, and we saw that Avnei Nezer and the Aruch HaShulchan said, and so on. He said, but the Maisa we don't find people keeping this. Evidently, the halacha is that at most it's a chumrah, or perhaps the loanim keep this, but regular people don't keep this halacha. And a non-Muktza Kedi you can move for any reason, and that's a machlokes that we saw lingers in to this day in practical halacha. So to summarize what we've said so far, we've spoken about the concept of Muktza. Muktza is about Haktza, what the Kedi is omed for, what the object is set aside for. And then we've spoken about the Gezerah of Nechemia, not our Rebbe Nechemia in the Mishnah, the Gezerah of Nechemia, in which he believes all Kedim initially from the era of Nechemia and onwards were forbidden to move for no particular necessary reason. And maybe there's some trace remnants of that Gezerah even after it was unraveled. In our Mishnah reverts back to the concept of Muktza, seemingly, though we'll discuss this in more detail shortly. And our Mishnah says, Kol HaKedim LeTsorech Shelo LeTsorech. All Kedim can be moved LeTsorech or Shelo LeTsorech. Rabbi Nechemia is of the view of Ein Nitalin Elah LeTsorech. So our Mishnah says that any Kedi can be moved LeTsorech Shelo LeTsorech. And the Amoraim, Rava and Rabbah discuss what we mean by LeTsorech and Shelo LeTsorech. And Nechemia has some more restrictive view of that. And he says, no, it can only be moved LeTsorech, it can only be moved LeTsorech. That's the Mishnah. What does Rabbi Nechemia mean when he says a Kedi can only be moved LeTsorech? So here there is a three-way machlokas, and that's one of the big things that I want to draw out from the sources that I gave. There's a heavy Rashba, Ramban, Rashi, and Tosfos really to learn through. If you're able to do so, and those who are able to do so, please do learn through it. If not, at least try and draw out the salient points from the summary that I'm giving. But just to summarize, Rashi is of the view that what Rabbi Nechemia means to say is you can only use a Kedi for the tashmish hamiyuchad loy. So a spoon can only be used for eating soup. If you wish to use the spoon for cracking a nut, you can't use it for that. If you wish to use the spoon as a paperweight, you can't use it for that, even though it's a non-Muktza Kedi. And maybe even if you want to use the spoon to eat rice as opposed to soup, maybe even that you can't use it for, or to eat meat as opposed to soup, maybe even that you can't use it for. So he holds a very restrictive view. Where do we see Rashi saying that? Really in two places. For those who learned the Sugya earlier, we saw that when Rabbi Nechemia came previously at the top of Kuf Chaf Gimel Amud Aleph, Rashi says that. And Rashi says that not on our Mishnah, but on the Gemara, and when he explains the differing views of Rava and Rabbah, he makes it clear that his view is that all Nechemia is allowing is LeTsorech tashmish hamiyuchad loy. So again, I want to emphasize in practical halacha, when we say that you can move a klisha melachot le'issa LeTsorech gufoy, what we mean by that is you can move a klisha melachot le'issa, a hammer, which is used for banging nails in, for any mutter use of the hammer. So you can use it to crack a coconut. That's what we saw at the beginning of the Perek. That's how we paskin, that's the halacha. But Rabbi Nechemia disagrees, and he says, no, you can only use a Kedi, whether what we call a Muktza Kedi or a non-Muktza Kedi, for the tashmish hamiyuchad loy, according to Rashi. So the spoon can only be used for eating with, and maybe even only for eating soup. And the hammer can only be used for hammering nails. And since that's an also use on Shabbos, it can't be used for anything at all. So that's Rashi's reading of the sugya. Rabbeinu Tam is cited in all the Rishonim. He's quoted in the Rashba, he's quoted in the Ramban, and he appears in the Tosas that I put on the source sheet at the top, in Tosas in Daf Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. But all the Rishonim on our sugya cite Rabbeinu Tam. And Rabbeinu Tam thinks that Nechemia means it can be used for a keli, it's less narrow prescription. It doesn't mean only for the tashmish that's miyuchad for it, but for any normal tashmish that it's used for, even if it's not tashmish hamiyuchad loy. So to give an example, a hammer is used for bashing things with. It may be true that the miyuchad tashmish of the hammer is to bang nails in. However, a hammer is used for banging things that need banging, and therefore cracking a coconut would be a mutter form of hammering something, and therefore Rabbi Tam would say, no, Nechemia would agree that that's called tashmish, that's called LeTsorech, because I'm using it for any normal tashmish of the object. If you have to crack a coconut, what do? No one owns a coconut cracker in their house. A nut cracker you might have, right, for smaller nuts, but no one has a dedicated appliance for breaking coconuts. Maybe commercial companies do. Use a hammer. So this is a tashmish that rogil lasos b'chol. It's normal to do with it, and therefore this would be allowed. Now there is a subtlety in how far Rabbeinu Tam goes. The language of Rabbeinu Tam in Tosfos is tashmish harogil lasos b'chol, a normal use of the object on weekday. So even though the hammer is dedicated for banging nails, any other normal use of a hammer would be allowed. Now, is breaking a coconut a normal, regular use of the hammer? Not really. From the point of view of the coconut, whenever you have to crack a coconut, you might take out your hammer. But from the point of view of the hammer, it's not really a regular use of the hammer. So in Rabbeinu Tam, it's not clear how much he would extend Rashi. But in the Rashba's version of Rabbeinu Tam, he adds in, even if you only use it rarely for that mechol. So as long as it's a normal, the word normal can mean two things. The word normal can be used for normal or for usual. It's normal to use a hammer to crack a coconut. It's not usual to crack a hammer for a coconut. So when Rabbeinu Tam expands Rashi, so again, Rashi says only for the tashmish that's miyuchad, what is dedicated for. Rabbeinu Tam says no, also something that it's normal to use it for. Does normal mean it's the norm to use it for that, even though it's not dedicated for that? In which case, cracking a coconut may be a rare event. Or does normal mean that it's a normal thing to do? It's not like you've squeezed a wacky use out of this object. I'm taking the hammer and I'm using it as a paperweight. I'm taking the hammer and using it as a back scratcher. That would be abnormal. I'm using it for something that's normal to use a hammer for, to crack a coconut, but not necessarily regular or usual to use a hammer for. That's a nuance of the Rashba in the Rabbeinu Tam. Again, unusually, sorry? It's normal because it's bashing, and hammers are designed to be used for bashing. And if you have to crack a coconut, you have to crack it. It'd be a very normal thing to do it. It's not like you're not finding some sort of yeshivish misuse of an object to sort of use it for something that's an unusual way to use the object. So it's a normal thing to use. It's not squeezing an unusual use out of it. You know, you're not taking something and perverting its use, using it for something that's abnormal to use it for, but it's not a regular use of it. So Rabbeinu Tam says everyone would agree it's not miyuchad. The hammer is miyuchad for hammering nails. It's not miyuchad for cracking coconuts. So Rashi would exclude that from the category. Rabbeinu Tam says anything that's normal, rogil, but how far does he go with that? Does that mean rare but normal, or only frequent but normal? Isn't entirely clear in Rabbeinu Tam. The Rashba says explicitly even rare and normal is enough. Yes, no, that is in earlier in it says Bechol Ma'arvin, yes. Sorry, the Tosfos in Bechol Ma'arvin is in Eruvin. The Tosfos in sorry, I'm getting confused. The other Tosfos I referenced, have a look at, is in our daf, 2 daf ago, one and a half daf ago, yeah. So this is the view of Rabbeinu Tam that the Rishonim cite and appears in Tosfos. Right? I should make that clear. And that's machlokas how far we expand Sorech Kufay. The reason this is going to become important is because according to Rabbeinu Tam, you can have even a kli shemelachto le'issa which sometimes would be allowed to be used according to Rabbi Nechemia on Shabbos. According to Rashi, by definition, what is a kli shemelachta le'isa? Something where its primary purpose is osa. The thing for which it's miyuchat is osa. So by definition, according to Rashi, you will never have a kli shemelachta le'isa, which according to Rabbi Nechemia is allowed to be used for anything on Shabbos. According to Rabbi Tam, you could have a kli shemelachta le'isa, which nonetheless, even though its dedicated task is forbidden on Shabbos, and therefore it's Muktza, nonetheless, it has a normal use, which is allowed on Shabbos, in which case you'd be allowed to use it. Again, this shiur is a little, especially for those who are new, this shiur is a little unusual in its son, and normally would go a bit more thoroughly through the Rishonim, but because I'm unable to give shiur for the next couple of sessions, I'm just highlighting the points that please learn from the Rishonim, and hopefully this will sort of become clear. The Rashba brings a third path, which he cites in the name of the Yesh Mefarshin. And if you have a look, I printed the Ramban after the Rashba, even though the Ramban is shorter than the Rashba and preceded the Rashba by a generation, right? The Ramban is the Rebbe of the Rashba. But I did it in that order because the Rashba is a little clearer and more sort of divided up. But the Ramban is of the view, and the Rashba cites it as Yesh Mefarshim, that all Rabbi Nechemia is coming to exclude is something which is a complete distortion of use. In other words, I take a hammer and I use it, I don't know, to cover something with, or as a paperweight, or as something to sit on. But anything which isn't a distortion of use, even that's enough. So to summarize, we've got 3 or 4 levels of what Rabbi Nechemia means when he says LeTsorech. Rashi says LeTsorech HaMiyuchad, the primary purpose of the keli. The Rashba says, Rabbeinu Tam says, anything which is rogil is frequent. That means either frequent or occasional, but still within the design And the Ramban says only something which is explicitly not a normal use of the object, something which is a weird use for the object, something which is out of the thing for which the object is designed to be used. So those are the three pshatim, or the 3 levels that emerge in the sugya. So far, is that okay? Just sort of working it out in the Gemara, how the Gemara continues. So Rava says that I won't go through the hash from the Gemara, because we're just trying to summarize it. Rashi says that whether like Rabbah or like Rava, only something which is kli shemelachta leheta, is it possible for Rabbi Nechemia to allow it LeTsorech gufay. But kli shemelachta le'isa, by definition, Rabbi Nechemia will never allow, because by definition, that's never a tzorech miyuchad lay. That's Rashi's view in Rabbi Nechemia. The Tosfos that we saw, Rabbi Tam that we saw, that the Rishonim bring, holds that even with a kli shemelachta le'isa, Rabbi Nechemia would allow LeTsorech gufay, as long as it's a tashmish harogel, whatever exactly tashmish harogel means, as we discussed. Now, out of that emerges a second point that we need to think about, which is, what would Rabbi Nechemia say about LeTsorech makoimoi for a kli shemelachta le'isa? So, according to Rabbi Tam, in the same way as Rabbi Nechemia allows LeTsorech gufay for a kli shemelachta le'isa, he just has a more narrow view of LeTsorech gufay. So the Tanakama holds any tzorech gufay of the keli you can use a kli shemelachta le'isa for, even if it's an unusual use. And Nechemia says no, only a usual use. So what are they arguing about? According to, let's just think conceptually for a minute. According to Rashi, the Tanakama holds any keli is omeid for any use, even if it's a kli shemelachta le'isa, where it's Muktza because its primary use is forbidden, but it's still a kli, it's still a slave of human beings, it's still omeid for any use that you can get out of it, and therefore the tzorech gufay it would be mutter. And a kli shemalachta leheter kal v'chomer, how much more so that would be the case? It's mutter, it's only for any use whatsoever, and therefore you can use it for any use. That would be the Tanna Kama. Nechemia is of the view that the keli is only sufficiently dedicated or omade for which use, for its primary use, for the use for which it's miyachad, and therefore any other use is, according to Nechemia, innovating too much in the use that the keli is omade for, and therefore it would be Muktza for any other use, and therefore by definition the kli shemalachta le'isa would be Muktza for everything. That's Rashi's view. The Rabbeinu Tam says, no, Nechemia's Chiddush is merely that the keli is only omade for any usual use, not for any non-rogel use. But even Rabbi Nechemia agrees that keli is the slave of human beings, and therefore omade for any regular use. All Nechemia is coming to exclude is irregular use, and the Tanna Kama holds no, a keli is a keli is a keli, it's only for any use, and therefore isn't looked at anything. So basically, the concept behind the argument is to what degree are all kelim sufficiently omade for any use that we're not concerned about the degree to which the keli is your innovating use wasn't dedicated before Shabbos for their ishtamshus. Muktza means it wasn't set aside or mucham prepared before Shabbos for this use. The Tanna Kama holds all kelim are prepared for any uses, and Rabbi Nechemia holds no, kelim are only prepared for a more tight category of use, according to Rashi miyachad, and according to Rabbeinu Tam rogil. But they're not omade just hefka for any use that you can possibly get out of it. That's with respect to tzorech gufay. What about with respect to tzorech makomay? So the truth is, why are kelim? Why is a Muktza keli omade? Why is it allowed to tzorech makomay? So kli shemalachta le'isa, you're not allowed to move mechama l'tel. Mechama l'tel means you're not allowed to move it to protect it because it's getting overheated and you want to move it to protect it. Why? Because it's kli shemalachta le'isa. The default setting of the keli is that it's omade for a Muktza use, and therefore you can't move it mechama l'tel. You can move it, however, for a Muktza use. That's what tzorech gufay means. What would Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam say in Rabbi Nechemia about tzorech makomay? So in Rabbeinu Tam, and this is Mefurish again in the Rishonim, he would argue that even a kli shemalachta le'isa is allowed to be moved LeTsorech makomay. Why? Because if it's allowed LeTsorech gufay on Shabbos, that means this keli has a Shabbos use. If it has a Shabbos use, it's allowed also LeTsorech makomay. That's in Rabbeinu Tam. In Rashi, however, we're not entirely clear, and this remains a second talking point. What would Rashi say according to Rabbi Nechemia? Does he allow the movement of a kli shemalachta le'isa LeTsorech makomay? He doesn't allow LeTsorech gufay because by definition the tashmish miyachad lo it wasn't prepared for. But would he allow the kli shemalachta le'isa LeTsorech makomay or not? And again, just to line up the views, the Ramban and the Rashba hold that it is mutter, according to Rava, of course, to move LeTsorech makomay. And the Rashba, in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, says that it's also to move, according to Rashi, LeTsorech makomay, because only a kli shemalachta leheter you'd be allowed to move LeTsorech makomay, but not a kli shemalachta le'isa. And the Rashba explains in the name of Rabbeinu Tam a nugget of svara in this, and he says the reason you're allowed to move a kli shemalachta le'isa LeTsorech makomay, according to us, is because it is dedicated or set aside or miyachad to move it around after its use. And therefore, kli shemalachta le'isa, according to Rabbi Nechemia, according to Rashi, which has no use, therefore can't be moved LeTsorech makomay. So again, when I move something LeTsorech makomay, I'm moving it for the sake of something else. It's getting in the way of something. Why can I move it LeTsorech makomay? The Rabbeinu Tam says the answer is because this kli is omade for being moved around after use. I use something and then I need to put it away so it doesn't get into the way of doing other things. And therefore he argues that according to Rashi, a kli shemalachta le'isa, according to Rabbi Nechemia, is not allowed LeTsorech makomay. Okay, I don't want all of this to become overwhelming and confusing. So just to summarize what we said, because again, I normally would do this after you've learned through the Rishonim, and I apologize I'm doing in advance. What I want you to draw out of the Rishonim is the following. Number one, please go through the Rishonim and look at the three categories of what Rabbi Nechemia means of LeTsorech. That's project number one. And project number two, is look in the Rishonim and see what they say about Tzorech Makomo in the Shitta of Rashi in Nechemia, and hopefully you'll see that there's two vantage points in this. Is this okay?
Yeah. The Rashba's explanation is restrictive in respect of is allowed to move it, but they shouldn't have said, once you've used it, you keep putting it, as you say, you put it back. You took it from me. You're only taking it away from it. It's not a general permission to move it.
The Rashba.
In explaining Rashi.
The Rashba is more restrictive, but I think what's important is that we've been lazy till now in worrying about why Tzorech Makomo should be allowed. Why is it that you can move a Muktza utensil to Tzorech Makomo? And the Rashba forces us to begin thinking about what the basis of the heter is. And his answer is that, at least in Rabbeinu Tam in Rashi, is because when you use things, you after you finish using them, you have to put them out of the way so they don't interfere with other use. And therefore all kelim are muchen to be moved to make way for other things. Part of the service that kelim offer us human beings is not just to do things for us, but also to get out of the way when we don't want them anymore around. And therefore all kelim are made for being moved out of the way for the sake of other things.
It is restrictive compared to freely being able to move it.
It is restrictive, but that's only because we haven't bothered thinking about what the heter of LeTsorech Makomo is.
Are you taking it then to agree to say that you couldn't move it? It wasn't still within a certain period of time of the initial movement?
No, the Rashba means a concept. That all kelim. Sorry? Oh, is that what you mean by restrictive? Oh, sorry, then I misunderstood you.
You've used it, you're allowed to move it, to put it out of the way. But you have to have used it.
No, the Rashba's not saying that. No, he's saying, I don't think the Rashba's saying this. That means to say that all kelim are omeid to be shoved out of the way if they begin interfering with other use. He doesn't mean, I want to relook at this, I hear your point. I didn't read him to mean that after you've used something, you can then immediately put it away. Kelim are all over the place. But when we ask ourselves, what is a keli prepared for and muchen for, the answer is it's prepared for use, and it's prepared to be shoved away if it's getting in the way of other things that I want to use it for. Yeah.
It's such a fine chiluk to say that you can move a keli, to move it around, but to use it for a different purpose is not within its own state. It's like the difference between Gufa and Makomo is very.
So everyone comes into the sugya intuiting that Tzorech Gufa makes more sense than Tzorech Makomo. In other words, I understand that a hammer is Muktza, fine, because it can't be used. Let's put aside from Nechemia. Let's go to Halacha. So you're learning Hilchos Muktza. You understand that, okay, a fork is not Muktza because it's muchen for mutter use. It's klishim lach l'heta. A hammer is Muktza because it's klishim lach l'issa. Okay, then you find out there's a heter called Tzorech Gufa. I can use the hammer if I need to use it for something. So you get the story that you say, okay, because it's a keli, it's a keli, it's a keli. All kelim are muchen for any use I can get out of them. But why? Then you find out that the klishim lach l'issa is also to move LeTsorech mechama l'tzel. You can't just move it for its own sake to protect it from the sun. So okay, I get that because its default setting is it's used for an osa item and not how to move it. Then you ask yourself, why am I allowed to move it to Tzorech Makomo? And that question always remains a little unanswered. And there's a number of theories you can put forward to that. You could say I'm allowed to move something to Tzorech Makomo because it has got a non-Muktza use. I can always use it to crack a coconut. I can use it for non-Muktza use, and that should be allowed. The Rashba gives us an answer to this question. He says, if kelim are our servants to be used for anything, they're also our servants to shuffle out of the way and not interfere with other things and be moved when they need to be moved. And therefore, again, it's wrong to ask the question, is something Muktza or not? The better halachic way to talk about it is it's Muktza with respect to some uses. Muktza is a halach about usefulness. It's Muktza with respect to some uses and not Muktza with respect to other uses. It's Muktza with respect, if it's a stone, it's Muktza with respect to all uses, because it's not omitted for any use. If it's a hammer, it's not Muktza with respect to Tzorech Gufa, and it's also not Muktza with respect to shuffling out the way to not interfere with other things. And arguably, according to Rabbi Nechemia, even though a keli is only omed for a tzorech miyuchad, perhaps part of the tzorech miyuchad is getting out of the way so that other things can be done. So it could be that tzorech makomo is more more makel. Again, to remind you, on Kufchaf Gimel Amud Beis, we saw really a machlokas. We saw a diakon. We saw Tosas that seemed to say that Tzorech Makom is more of a heter ravacha than more of a broad test than Tzorech. We saw that as a discussion in the Gemara. Sorry, Ezgi, you've got your hand up online.
Sorry, yeah, I was just going to bring up that Tosfos about which way around, like sort of the kol shekain went.
Yes.
But we see in Rashi here that he says the kol shekain's the other way. In the first wide line of Rashi, he's talking.
Yes.
It seems to be according to Rashi that it should be also Tzorech Makomo.
Okay, so in terms of Maram Makomo's number one, yes, you're right. For those who are here, Kufchaf Gimel on base, we have a Tosfos that discusses is it a kal v'chomer. I'm not arguing that the only way to look at it is that Tzorech Makomo is broader than Tzorech Gofoi. Adrabah, the intuition is that Tzorech Makomo is a more narrow pattern. I'm simply saying that the Rashba and others push us into thinking, and we saw this really early on Kufchaf Gimel base, that there's a story to say that Tzorech Makomo is more of a hatter than Tzorech Gofoi. That's all. In other words, I'm not crunching yet the maths of our sugya and what actually plays out. I'm just summarizing some of the svaras that emerge from the Rishonim, and then in the week that I'm away, I hope everyone will crunch the data a bit more fully, and then we'll learn it a bit more rigorously. Okay. I'm just going to conclude again because unfortunately I'm not going to be able to give a share for the next two sessions. One more thing just to play around with is, why does Rabbi Nechemia have such a narrow definition? Is it because he thinks in Hilchos Hachana and Muktza it should be so narrow? Or is it a hangover from Gezeras, his namesake, Nechemia, who actually believed that even Hachana aside, Kelim shouldn't just be moved willy-nilly on Shabbos? So again, just to remind everyone, we're learning Hilchos Muktza, but in the last Amud we learned about a biblical Gezerah from the time of Nechemia, that even non-Muktza Kelim shouldn't be moved around. Why is Rabbi Nechemia taking such a narrow stance? Is it because of Hilchos Muktza in Hachana he thinks this is the logic? Or because he thinks that this is a hangover from a more restrictive view about Kelim in general? So I'll stop here, and Mr. Shem will carry on next week. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone online also.